Good evening and welcome to the Big H podcast. My name is Mike Heise and I'll be your host for this episode. With me tonight is John Corcoran, who's held many roles throughout the village community in his lifetime. And we're here to explore a little bit about what he's brought to our community. Truth be told, I first met John when you were doing the presentations at the elementary school on the indigenous people population. And they were of extreme interest to the kids. And then I met you even more so on the Parma Hilton Historical Society. Correct. As you served as the vice president there, and wanted to do a podcast with you. And after getting some information, I'm really glad because I think you got a great story to tell.
Well, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Good. And I would like to start off with talking a little bit about your biographical information. And so when I think about that, one of my simple questions is, where were you born? A little bit about your parents, any siblings, and places that you grew up as a youngster.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, I have to say I was born at a very young age. I grew up in Rochester in the Dewey Driving Park area, the old 10th Ward, as they called it. And my folks were wonderful parents. My mom was a housewife. My dad worked for the city health department when it was a city health department as a health inspector. Then he moved on to the State Liquor Authority and he eventually became the head of the State Liquor Authority in Monroe County. So I'm the third of four siblings. My late brother, Walter, was a corporate lawyer in New York City. And my older sister, Grace, is a retired supervisor from BOCES 2, and she resides in Brockport. And our youngest sister is a retired nurse living in Greece. So we're all still fairly close, always were. And I had a great young life, naive like most kids, and thinking life was simple. And I'm not complaining.
Right.
I had a great life.
And then I usually also like to ask, parents are so influential and family is so influential. Speak to that if you have any memories or what your parents taught you.
I always wanted to be my father. I wanted to grow up and have a family and a job where I came home at 5 o'clock and did my stuff instead of some folks who devote their whole life to their occupation and all. But they were my heroes, you might say. And of course, you always try to marry a girl like mom,
Very true. Very true.
I think I did and have. So we had a great life. We had a cottage when I was a kid up in the Bristol Hills and all. And I always wanted to be a family man and do what they did.
Mm-hmm. And when you talked about your siblings, you said your late brother was a corporate lawyer in New York City.
He was.
Explain about him and what he was like.
Well, he was my older brother. He used to tease me on occasion, several occasions. He was 6 years older. He went to the seminary here in the area, St. Andrews, 2 years at St. Bernard's, and a year studying in Rome at the Vatican. And then he left that career path and became a lawyer, went to Cornell Law School. And he always wanted to be a corporate lawyer, I guess, because that's what he chose. They specialized even back then. He graduated in 1964 from Cornell Law School. So we stayed fairly close, although we always lived in Greenwich or New York City and all that. But in later years, when he was retired, we got together more often and all that. So life was good. We all went our own path, but we always stayed close.
It does sound like that. I mean, you also made mention that your sister was a retired supervisor at BOCES 2. Yes. Tell me a little bit about her occupation and what she was like.
Okay.
Is like.
She worked in adult education. She supervised all the night school teachers, those who went out to do outreach to various special needs groups, even to the women's prison in Albion. She'd go out there once a month to check in with her people. And she said it was very intimidating walking through those corridors and barbed wire all around and all that. But she was always very confident, very glib, even in high school. She was the head of a student group in the Diocese of Rochester. She was very glib and still is, and very well educated and smart. So we've had some great discussions on literature and all that over the years. And so she's retired now. She's older than I am.
Okay.
And living in Brockport, very comfortable, still going strong.
That's great to hear.
Yeah.
And then I'm going to finish out with your younger sister, Mary.
Yep.
And you said that she was a retired teacher that lives in Greece.
Nurse. Yeah,
Okay.
she was a nurse. Yeah, she and her husband live in Greece, and they have one daughter, an adult daughter, and they live a fairly quiet life. I call up once a week and say, "Hi, what's new?" Oh, same old stuff, but that's okay. That's a good life.
Right.
If you can say I'm very content as is and all that. I mean, none of us are spring chickens anymore.
Right.
I'll be 80 in a few weeks.
Okay.
And I still feel like I'm 21. And my wife tells me I still like 14 most times, but life is good. Thank you, Lord.
Yeah, I would never guess that you're pushing 80.
80 next month. Yep.
Okay, well, that's good. It's good to hear a little bit from where you come from, your folks and your sister, your siblings. In terms of moving up the ladder a little bit in life, that early education, whether it's kindergarten through sixth grade, middle school, or high school.
Well, all us Corcoran kids went to Holy Rosary School in the city from kindergarten through eighth grade. And then I went to Aquinas. I'm a 1961 graduate of Aquinas. And then I went to St. John Fisher for 2 years. And then we parted by mutual agreement.
Might be a story behind that.
Well, I started kindergarten when I was 4 until December. And I started college at 17 until December. I was a little bit socially behind. And I was a darn good student in grammar school. I never had to study. I caught it all. Mm-hmm. High school, it's got a little tougher. College was, this is hard. Mm-hmm. And after 2 years, I said, I just want to go get a job and grow up and be my dad, which was short-sighted at the time, but I have no complaints on my life. Worked out. I started at Kodak in 63 after I had 2 years of college under my belt. And over the years, climbed up the ladder and all that. So no complaints.
You kind of started talking about those early occupations. And so go ahead and expand on those, either occupations you shared when you were in high school, getting odd jobs. Well,
my first job, I was in high school, was as a Wegmans boy, a carry-out boy, stock boy, at the old Dewey Driving Park store. They tore that down in 64. I left in 63, so they must have been devastated. They took the store right down and built a new one. But that was a good bunch working there. I have to say, that was my first job, and I was quite proud of myself that I was functioning in the adult world. I did a good job, they said, and, I had nice friends there, and the older folks were very nice. So I was pleased to see that I could make it in this world, because I was a shy kid, and then after college, I went to Kodak, and my wife Sharon and I were married in 1964, and we bought a house in 66, and she wanted to stay home because we had a 6-month-old daughter. So she stayed home, and I got my second job. A lot of dads get 2 jobs, but I really liked it. I've always been a car guy, a grease monkey at heart, even though I didn't want to work that way full time. I saw how hard they work. And in the weather and all that. But anyway, I worked at TK Fabrian's down on Dewey Avenue, right by the Grease line, and worked there 6 years, 3 nights and Saturdays, and enjoyed it. Learned a lot. Had a lot of adventures. I could tell you about auto club calls in the blizzard and all that. But we were, young and ambitious, and I always thought, if you want something, go out and work extra for it and get it. Instead of.
I think that's great because, I know I'm not going to make statements on culture nowadays, but people sometimes they don't want to get that second, third job nowadays.
Yeah. The work ethic is not the same as it used to be. Of course, those days you had more opportunities, I think, but there's always jobs. Many people disdain certain jobs, but you want to feed the kids, you get out and get one or two, So that's what we did those days. We weren't special. That's just what people did. So anyway, I did, and we had a good life. I worked at Eastman Kodak for 28 years. I was in IT, or as we used to call it, computer services, and went up through the rungs. I was a computer operator, then a lead operator, and then I became the training coordinator, course writer, and that was fun. I found my niche when I became a trainer in a training course writer and doing the research and all that. They just took me out of the computer room and I applied for the job. And I self-taught myself how to write training courses. Kodak those days had fabulous business libraries. And I went down and studied the books I found in there and how to write a course and what's an objective and what isn't and all that. And I loved it. And then they came along about 1989 and sold our department off to IBM and built Canal Ponds. So luckily I stayed with Kodak. I didn't get transferred over. And when they had that retirement package in 91, I retired at age 47. I mean, obviously I was too young to stay home, and we had a 6-year-old daughter at that time. But it was just dumb luck, dumb luck. So after that, I worked for the Genesee Transportation Council, which is associated with the state DOT. The Transportation Council is the band director of all the 9 county DOTs. To get federal money, you must have a unified plan, et cetera. Well, that's what they mostly did. They're all civil engineers. I ran rideshare, eHarmony for carpoolers.
Okay.
Yeah, that was fun. I'd get out to businesses and talk up carpooling. It was a free service, and sit in the cafeteria all day and hand out key tags that said rideshare and sign people up. And it was fun. That lasted 7 years while that project was funded by the state. And then I left there. I was able to take a state retirement, not very big, keeps me in coffee and bagels in the morning, but that's about it. And then I went back to Kodak office on State Street, where I had spent my career as a guardsmark security officer. They loved us old Kodak retirees because we knew the ropes, we knew most of the people, and that's where I had worked all those years. So I drove a patrol car around the Kodak office campus in the neighborhood for 12 years, looking very formal and important. But that was a good life too. A lot of good friends I made there, and I did that for 12 years. In the interim, my wife Sharon passed away in 2009 after a long illness, and I worked until 2012. And I said, I'm 68. I should retire when I can still do something. So I retired. And 2 months later, I said, I'm getting really bored here. So I went over to the senior center here in Hilton and signed up. They needed a bingo caller on Tuesday afternoons. I said, I can do that. So I did for about 6 months. And they said, we have an opening in the kitchen. You want to be a lunch lady? I said, sure. So for 5 years, I was a lunch lady 3 days a week. It was a part-time job at the Hilton Parma Senior Center. Most fun I ever had. My fabulous boss, Jessie Bruger, who still lives in town, she and I laughed every day and worked hard. And we had a great time. We really did. So I did that for 5 years. And I said, I'm slowing down. The old legs aren't what they used to be because we were on our feet the whole time. So I backed off from that. I retired from that. And let me see. I still do a bunch of volunteer work in various venues. Plus, in 2019, I met my current wife, Paula, and we hit it off very well. And we were married in 2020. And I'm practically still a newlywed after 3 years. Life is good. Life is good.
Let's go back. Your family, your children. How many children do you have?
I have 4 children.
Okay, very good. Let's speak about that.
All right. My oldest is Teresa Corcoran Skelly. She lives up in Shiloh. She has 4 daughters, and they are the source of my 10 great-grandchildren.
Wow.
Yeah, I feel old. I have 8 granddaughters, and I have 10 great-grandchildren, boys and girls.
Okay.
And that's Terry. She's the oldest. And then Timothy is 56, and he has 2 daughters, grown daughters. He lives now in Charlottesville, Virginia. He runs his own consulting firm. He started out after St. Bonaventure College selling software. He's very glib, and he could do the selling part. And he didn't get that from me, And he saw a niche that lawyers, he was selling legal software, are great lawyers, but they're not very good businessmen.
Okay.
And as the markets tightened and tightened, clients wanted estimates. What's this going to cost, this project? He started seeing that, and he started his own consulting firm. And he teaches them not only all the quality black belt services and all that, but how to do business and how to manage people, basically. And he's made a career out of that. So he's done quite well for himself. And then Kevin, my son Kevin, he's 53. He lives here in Hilton, and he is a dispatcher at the Rochester Airport. He spent many years as a fire dispatcher, either at Chilai or North Greece, and now he's at the airport, a security dispatcher. He doesn't fly the planes. You know. He's a security dispatcher, and he's a bachelor.
Okay.
And never been married, has no kids. And then my daughter Colleen, our youngest, Kevin, was 15 when Colleen came along. Surprise, surprise.
Mm-hmm.
And we were both 41 at the time and really surprised. But anyway, she's been great. And she's 38. She lives in Lawrenceville, New Jersey with her husband and 2 teenage daughters. And she's a music school teacher. She loved music in Hilton. My 3 older kids went to Cardinal Mooney High School after Hilton. But she was so involved in marching band by the time she graduated 8th grade, we couldn't tear her away from all that. Mm-hmm. So she stayed with Hilton, went to Duquesne University, and was educated as a music teacher. And that's what she does. And she was going to run the high school marching bands. And guess what? She wound up teaching elementary music, and she loves elementary school. So
how many years has she been doing that? Approximately.
Well, she graduated Duquesne in 07.
Mm-hmm.
So quite a few, yeah. And this is 2023.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, it took her 3 years to get a permanent job. As most teachers find out, you sub and this and that. And she always said, I'll never teach in my home district because I don't want to be seen in my pajama pants Saturday morning in the grocery store.
Yep.
Guess what? Her permanent job, she got, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago. She teaches in the Lawrenceville school system, and she lives in Lawrenceville, New Jersey. So, but you go where the money is, where the jobs are.
Mm-hmm.
And she's managed to make it through that situation.
Well, I think your father would be happy with what you provided with your family. A nice family man. Everyone seems to be successful.
We're a great family, I think.
Mm-hmm.
I'm no superstar. Their mom, Sharon, was the coach, the encourager, and all that. I was generally clueless.
All of us dads are, John.
Yes. Yes, I've gotten that impression.
Now, are you able to, do you have Corcoran reunions, or do you able to get away and visit all these people?
We used to always, during the summer, they'd all come here. And then Thanksgiving, we'd all go down to New Jersey. But since my son moved to Virginia, and the kids are gotten older, and my daughter with her 3 grown daughters, they're an entity unto themselves almost. Mm-hmm. So we don't do it as much. We do try to do it. And when we can, usually summertime and people are less busy and all that. But yeah, it's not often we're all together anymore. Mm-hmm. Paula, my wife, has 4 grown children, 2 boys, 2 girls. And let's see, one lives in Hilton, one lives in Spencerport, one lives in Gates, and one lives in Knoxville, Tennessee.
Wow.
So they're all spread all over too. But we have a great clan. We all get together, and I've been blessed. My whole life I've been blessed. I really have.
It really seems like you kept yourself busy with jobs, and it's enabled you to foster families too.
Well, yeah. Actually, when we lived in the city, my wife and I, Sharon, we bought our first house in the city, lived there 5 years. We took newborns for the Catholic Charities right out of the hospital and kept them as foster children until they were placed and all that. And we just had a spirit of community service, you might say. My late wife, Sharon, was the religious education coordinator at the local St. Leo's parish for 30 years.
Wow.
She ran all the kids' education and some of the adult education and all that. So, and I'm still doing some volunteer work. I do a number of things too. So
I want to touch on a little bit. You said that you would take the foster babies until they were placed.
Mm-hmm.
Describe to me what that's like, because I've never heard about that.
It can be difficult. I mean, not so much for me, but for Sharon, who took care of them. You get attached. These beautiful little kids, and they're going to be adopted. But mom has to sign off, and the right parents have to be found. And she, at least once, she asked that they take the baby and replace it in another foster home. She's getting too attached.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to break her heart.
Mm-hmm.
And we had one poor little girl who was so troubled because her mom was an addict and she was going through withdrawal. As a tiny infant, she's
Mm-hmm.
going through withdrawal.
Mm-hmm.
And that was difficult. But other than that, babies are great. We had 3 kids of our own at the time. We had our hands full. I was working 2 jobs.
Mm-hmm.
And, but we were charging through life. Everything's going to be better. Every year there's going to be a Kodak bonus.
Mm-hmm.
That didn't last an awful long time.
Right.
But we had a great life, and we just knew we just wanted to, accomplish things and move ahead. So
You're going to give back in the process.
absolutely.
We're
My whole family are Catholic, educated, and all that, and as is Paul and her family, and we just learned all that. I mean, I had grammar school, high school, and college Catholic education, and all. So, and my folks were a great example. I mean, there's a whole combination of facets to this, but yeah.
Okay. Now, obviously, when I started to meet you, it was in your presentations at the schools, and then through the Historical Society. How did you get interested in history? Was that pretty obvious from an early young age, or did that spring up as you matured?
I liked history in school and English. In fact, when I started at St. John Fisher, I was intending to be an English/history teacher. The early years, specialized too much. But anyway, because I always liked history. Anyway, back in '66, my mother-in-law gave me an Arch Merrill book, a local history writer. And I was fascinated. This is cool because he wrote about local things around Rochester, things I can go out and see and touch and realize significant things happen right here where I'm standing. And that just lit a fire in me somehow. And I've been a big history fan, local history especially, ever since. And when the kids were young, we'd go for rides and we would go out and see historical markers and plaques, and I'd tell them all about it. And they very politely, yes, Dad. Oh, yeah. And I think their politeness and not getting bored had to do with always stopping for ice cream as we went home from this trip.
Oh, sure. Oh, sure.
So anyway, we had a great life, and they got a good education, I think, from good old Dad.
Now, and then let's touch on a little bit. You've talked a little bit about what you've done with the church and everything. Any other community positions that you've done throughout your lifetime here in Hilton or wherever?
From 1980 to 1990, I ran the youth program at St. Leo's. We used to have sock hops. We had a couple of sock hops that were great fun. For the parents, too, they came and enjoyed it. And I still have my 1958 black leather jacket, which I wore. I couldn't zip it up and still breathe. But now I can't even get it around me.
Right.
But yeah, I did that for 10 years. Of course, when my wife was working there, I get pulled into some of those things. I've been there, St. Leo's chair of the parish council a couple of times around. Let me see. I've been a part-time paper boy because all of our kids had paper routes, and especially my daughter Colleen, when she was in marching band in high school and had the suburban news route around our neighborhood, Hillside Drive, etc. She'd be off many weekends, so guess who would pack the papers and deliver? Yeah, good old Dad.
Right.
So anyway, and I've been with the Historical Society since about 2010, I guess. And I've been involved in the board since about 2012 and had several positions on the board. Shortly after I joined, maybe a year or two, some of the folks came to me and said, would you allow yourself to be nominated as the secretary? And you'd be on the board. And I had been to a couple board meetings to observe. And that's an auspicious sounding thing. I was very naive. So anyway, I was elected by a landslide because I was the only candidate.
Best way to run.
Oh, yeah. And then I served for 2 years. That's got a lot of duties involved with it. Nancy Kuhn had done it for years and even picked it up after I bowed out. And she's always done a good job. And she was my mentor in doing that. Nancy Kuhn was still with the Historical Society. So anyway, I did that. And then they asked me to be nominated as vice president. So, okay, I got elected as vice president. And then they said, how would you like to be the chairman of the board? Which means you get to bang the gavel at the beginning and the end of the meetings, Yeah, and bring people back on target here. They get off on tangents, as we all know at meetings.
Yes.
So I did that. And just recently, this past season, I stepped down from those posts and said, let someone else do it, because us guys get old and stale and set in our ways, and they need some new blood to keep the organization going.
Are you still involved in the Historical Society?
Yeah. Well, the Indian programs we do, we're going to talk about in a bit. They are sponsored by the Historical Society. They were begun by the Historical Society before my time, even. So and of course, I go to their lectures. We have a monthly lecture from September through May. On the second Monday of each month, we have a guest speaker come in, and some of them are very fascinating. Some of them I said, it doesn't sound very good. I've never been disappointed. They've always been good and enjoyable. And this is at the Ingham Room now, at the community center, right in the heart of Hilton. Used to be at the town hall, but we've grown so much that we needed a bigger venue. So,
tell our audience a little bit about some of those lectures that really still stick out in your mind.
Well, let me see. One I didn't think I'd really like. It was about the deep cut, the Erie Canal deep cut west of Lockport, cut through solid rock, and the engineering and all that was just unbelievable. That was very interesting. In another one, a young woman came and told us about the opera houses of Livingston County. Opera houses in Livingston County is rural, pretty much. You'd be surprised how many buildings were built as opera houses upstairs and other stores or something downstairs. Fascinating history, because I know the southern tier quite a bit. And that really opened my eyes, too. Everyone has something to say about something they know about history, which many folks may not know, So we've had a lot of good talks. Wow. Dave Crum, our village and town historian, has done several good ones about the Hojack line that went through town, and even the Main Street big sites and historic buildings and all that. And he and Ed Gable both were longtime members of the society, have done a good job. And we've had many guest speakers. One young woman came from I forget the name of it, the Stained Glass Society, or a business. Her name was O'Hara, but her family has run the stained glass business in Rochester for years. That was fascinating. It really was. The places they've been and the work they've done, and some about how to make the glass and all that too. So that was good. And
well, good. When I first reached out to do a podcast, you talked about, well, which angle, which type of story do you want me to go towards? We're going to talk about Indigenous people. But another one you brought up was Arch Merrill.
Yes.
And I'd like you to tell us a little bit about who he was, and then what he's done for our region, and you personally fostering your interest in history.
Yes, absolutely. Arch Merrill, the book which my mother-in-law gave me back in '66, wrote 23 books on local history. Local being generally Western New York, Southern Tier, and the Rochester area in particular. He was a cigar-chomping night editor at the Democrat and Chronicle for many years, but he also wrote a Sunday history column. And over the years, those history columns were compiled into 23 different books. Fabulous writer. You think of the old movie rough, tough editor in the newsroom and all that, but he had a writing style that was gentle, which just fascinated me. Of course, all his articles were first published in the newspaper. So they had to be clear and concise, and they followed logic sequence of facts and all that. So they're all easy reads is what it boils down to. So he did that. His first book was called A River Ramble. He literally walked the 130 miles of the Genesee River from its source in a farmer's field, a little spring in Gold, Pennsylvania, right down to the Charlotte area where it empties. Now, he didn't do that all in one time, but he did it in the fall of '43, I believe, on his vacation. He never drove a car. His wife would drive him. He'd hitchhike. He'd take, buses between villages and all that. But he did this for years, doing all the research. And he was very thorough in his research. He'd research, local libraries and archives, sit in diners and talk to people about the old days and all that. And fascinating writer. His prose was clear and straightforward, as befits a true newspaperman, but also gentle and eloquent. Let me see. A typical Archmerle sentence might be, now those intrepid pioneers of days gone by all slumber on the hillside, overlooking the valley where they labored so long. What a picturesque, poetic way to express thoughts like that. And his books are full of that, but facts too. I mean, he uncovered all sorts of quirky things and people. So he did. He sought out the unusual, the peculiar, and the charming local lore. And he traveled those regions that he studied. For instance, I was surprised to hear Winston Churchill's maternal grandparents came from Palmyra and Marion, New York.
I had never heard that.
His great-grandfather was a successful businessman and growing more successful. They moved to Rochester for a few years. They lived here. They moved to New York City, where Winston Churchill's mother was born. And then they moved to England, where that young lady married Lord Randolph Churchill, and they had a son, Winston.
Mm-hmm.
And he not always, but he regularly referred to his American roots and his Western New York heritage and all that. I thought that was pretty cool.
Mm-hmm.
And Merrill also harbored a sense of awe for the beautiful Finger Lakes and once said, their very names are liquid music. I love that term, liquid music, all the Indian names.
Right.
Hopefully roll off your tongue.
Right.
Some are hard to make to roll, though. Oh, dear. While most of Archmerle's books are focused on the Rochester and its nearby environs, he also chronicled much of the history of Western New York. So there's 2 books on the Southern Tier, Southern Tier 1 and Southern Tier 2. There's so much of the Southern Tier.
Mm-hmm.
And he himself was born and raised in Sandusky, New York, which is a few miles north of Olean. And he was always a country boy at heart, I guess. And so he had an amazing way of expressing himself, which just grabbed me. But all the facts and figures and the stories. I mean, did you know? I didn't until I read his first book. I think it was one of his books. That Ithaca, New York, was once the hotbed of movie making before Hollywood was ever thought of. Do you remember the old black and white, the Perils of Pauline and all that? Many of those were filmed in Ithaca because the big gorge going through the town and the campus was a great place for throwing the maiden off the cliff and all that, or threatening to. And then it would end. You'd have to come back next week to see the rest of it. Right. A lot of movie making went on in Ithaca until they realized the weather was not terribly conducive to having too many good days. Mm-hmm. And they found out that California was a lot better and sunnier. So they moved to, I guess, Hollywood, and created Hollywood, I guess you'd say. But at one time, Ithaca, I mean, who would know that? There's still tales down there about the movie stars roaring around the countryside in their fancy cars and all that, and hitting all the pubs as they have a want to do.
You know, when you told me that you're interested in Archmerle, I did Google him, and there is a picture of him at a typewriter with a big cigar chopping on it.
Yep, like, there is that.
That's who he's talking about.
Yep, it's in one of his books.
In terms of his books, you said he wrote 23 of them.
23.
Have you read a good many of them?
All of them. Several times.
Do you have particular favorite or 2 or 3?
Well, let me see. I have a list of all of them here. Yeah. Land of the Senecas, I think, is great. Slim Fingers Beckon, about the Finger Lakes. The River Ramble is great because it talks about the Genesee River. As an aside, a fabulous book to read if you want to know about the Genesee River is Archmerle's. Henry Clune's, a co-worker of his at the newspaper. Henry Clune's The Genesee, written in 1963. Talk about fabulous history revealed about mid-New York State. It's a great book. Anyone who likes history should read that book. And let's see. He's written so many, but I like the ones about the Finger Lakes and the Indian lore, because as a kid, we had a place up in the Bristol Hills. When I read these books, I said, I know those places. I know those towns. It just, wow, when you can say, I know that place, or I was there, or I can go see it again, that really lit me up. That just set a fire under me to pursue that even more.
Well, I think it's a good transition into what I want to talk about to you about next, is your Indigenous people interest and your program that you've developed in the school.
Right. Yeah. I have 3 programs I do. The one I'm most proud of is this one we're going to talk about. I do on the early history of the village of Hilton, and of course in Arch Merrill, to a presentation, a lecture. But the Indigenous people one was begun before my days at the Historical Society. Marilyn Loudon Coss Wright, who recently passed away about 2 years ago, she had an artifact, a tomahawk, that was given to her 7 times back grandfather by the Indians when he allowed them to camp near Loudon Point on Braddock's Bay, because they were stranded in a snowstorm or whatever, and they camped there for a week. And as a gift, they gave him one of these tomahawks. She still had it, and she'd bring it when her granddaughter was in 4th grade and talk about that. And that sort of keyed off this whole program. So she's gone now. Frank Thomas, who was her partner for years doing that, he's gone. They passed away. And Charlie Nichols, who was on the team when I was invited in, he stepped away for health reasons. So somehow I inherited this after a few years. I became the leader of the band here. And at one point, we were down to 2 people doing it, which is not bad. But when we bring our artifacts from the museum and we set them out on these big tables in the schools, we need a lot of eyes and ears to see that the kids don't get too dangerous with. Because we bring the tomahawks and the this and that, and then the furs. The girls love the furs, and the boys love the weapons. Yep. All that. So all the pretend weapons, they're not real ones. Right. We use facsimiles we've created ourselves. But anyway, we have some arrow points and all that we bring, and we tell them about that. The kids are studying the Indigenous people in 4th grade. So I speak to the Eastern Woodland Indians who lived in this area. I mean, of course, they're out west and everywhere else too across this country, but I speak to the ones which were here because this is where they lived. Actually, the Indians were smarter than we. They never lived closer to the lake than Scottsville. It was too darn cold down here. But they came down regularly to hunt, fish, Salmon Creek, the flats where the Tops grocery store is, the fireman's field. Those are favorite camping grounds for the natives. And they came down here, and in later years, much evidence of their camping was there. They catch the fish, they dry the fish, etc. And they go down to Braddock's Bay to get the cranberries on the bogs. As a matter of fact, Route 259 from here to its end up near Scottsville was an Indian trail originally, known as the Conawagas Trail. Conawagas means stinky water because up near Avon there were sulfur springs, and this trail led up that way, and this was the trail to get there or away from it or whatever. But so yeah, most roads around here, many of them were former trails. So anyway, we tell the kids about that and expand a little bit because we explain to them how the culture worked. Mom and the girls did the women's work, which was a lot of hard work. All the agriculture was done by the females, and how the men were the warriors and the protectors and all that. And about tanning and how you do the tanning of the hides by taking the brain matter out of the animal and squishing it up in your hands, rubbing it, and they all go, ew. Right. But that's the way it was. I mean, the Indigenous people here lived the Stone Age existence. They had no metal. They had nothing to weave other than reeds to make baskets. There was no fibers to weave to make clothing. They strictly subsisted on what they could grow or hunt or make, their clothing out of the skins of the animals and all that. I mean, And it was tough. Every March, they barely survived till there was food available again. It was not an easy existence. So anyway, the kids, I think, have to know about those things.
Mm-hmm.
I also think all young folks should know there's an awful lot of living that went on around here, even in more modern times, before they arrived. I mean, look at the pioneers here. Look at their great-grandfathers or grandfathers who worked hard and built the communities and all that. It's a good perspective building exercise for the young folks, I think. And we're here to do it. The team from the Hilton Farmer Historical Society.
Who goes into the schools and does that Indian program with you? I think you said Ed Gable.
Ed Gable, who's a longtime member of the society, Frank Hubble, and Kathy Etzel. She's new this year because she just retired as a teacher, I guess, and she wanted to do this. So the four of us are doing this in the next few weeks. We'll be at the fourth grades doing these programs. They last one school period, about 20 minutes of our doing a little lecture, and then about 20 minutes of the kids coming up and touching and feeling and asking questions and all that. And me biting our nails till they all put things down safely.
Yeah, I've seen your programs 2 or 3 times, and
yes.
they're really, really well received by the kids and
That's
the teachers.
great.
They get a lot out of it. Explain to me a little bit about history and just how important you think it is not only to learn American history, world history, but also local history.
Well, it is. It gives you a perspective on things. It makes you realize that sometimes history gets rewritten here and there for who knows what reasons, political reasons or just ineptness or whatever. And it makes you a better citizen. It makes you a more thoughtful voter when you have history. I'm not talking necessarily local history, but world history. If you look at world history, what do humans do? We fight. If we don't have a battle to fight, we'll find one. You know, it's sad. This world is such a mess now because there's so many battles going on. And if you get a basic knowledge of human reactions, you can anticipate what may happen in certain situations. You're a more thoughtful citizen. And I think more valuable citizen too, because you use your head. You're not swayed by, buzzwords and sound bites and all that.
Oh, well, that's great. That's really some of the best thing I've heard so far in this podcast. I've heard a lot of good stuff. So if you had a word or word to describe Hilton, what would it be?
It's full of history, as is every community, full of history. But I mean, if we live here, I think we should know more of its history. And I would highly recommend Leah Wright's 1985 book, Hilton, USA. It is virtually the Bible and Hilton history. It's a big yellow paperback.
I think I have it around here somewhere.
There's still, many people have them. They're still for sale, I believe, at either the village office or Dave Crumb's office. And that was published in 1985. And that is the Bible as far as that. And also, the late Shirley Cox Houston wrote a number of books on local history. And it's fascinating to me. They were sisters. Shirley and Leah were sisters, both historians, wonderful historians, documenting it, writing books, and they're still out there. Arch Merrill books are all still in print, and or you can find them used online. So I think there's a whole world of education out there if you're interested. But the fascinating stories, they're not just facts, but they're interesting. They're very interesting to read. Like, who lived in that house? Oh my gosh, that house was built in 1835 and it still stands. And I mean, things like that that you can see and touch and walk by. It just gets me all excited, as you can see.
Yes. And it should. Before we went on the podcast, we were talking, you and I, with my wife, and you were talking about a program that I think it's called Story. Explain to our listeners a little bit of what that is.
I highly recommend folks get involved in that. Storyworth is an online service. For a fee of $40, Storyworth sends you an email prompt to write a story on this topic from your life, like my old neighborhood when I was growing up, or my first car, or my friends in college, or here's 25 more topics, or anything you want to write on. Write a story from your life once a week. They send you that prompt. You type it up, you send it to them, they save them. After 52 weeks of this, they publish a hardcover book, Stories of My Life. And you have documented your life for your family, your friends, for your progeny. I mean, I bought a dozen of them at $40 a pop. But I mean, I passed them out to my kids and grandkids and all
Good
that.
stocking stuffers.
Oh, yeah. Oh, they don't fit. No. But they're a hardcover book. My picture's on the back. But I think it's important to document that. Look at the Laura Ingalls Wilder books and then the TV show. It was wildly popular and still is in reruns, the TV show,
Mhm.
and the books are still used frequently. It was her everyday life,
Mhm.
growing up on the prairie and all that, Little House on the Prairie.
Mhm.
But the everyday life from 150 years ago is fascinating, or even 100 years ago, because it's been around quite a while. You could be the same way. You write your story-worth book, and your grandchildren, great-grandchildren, etc., will be fascinated. Dad, Grandpa, whatever wrote this.
Mhm.
This was him. He lived
Mhm.
this life. Quaint, funny, weird. But, that's where you come from, kids.
Mhm. Right.
Kids need to know that.
Well, if they made a movie or a TV series of you 50 years from now, who's going to play you?
Oh, dull. No. It'd be very dull.
Well, that's really cool. I think that is great service to look into. I like people should
Yeah.
always journal anyways. I've always heard
Yes.
it's good for the soul.
I have a journal book. I've kept one for over 50 years.
Mhm.
Stories of my life. It's a whole shelf.
Mhm.
And someday I hope my kids do something with them rather than toss them. But
Keep them in a
just my
box.
daily activities.
Yeah.
What I accomplished that day and all that. But yeah, it's important. I like to look back and just see, what was I doing 30
Mhm.
years ago? Or my kids will call up and say, Dad, what year did I get my driver's license? When was that? So I look up in the books. It's a great resource too.
Well, this has been really good getting to know you and getting to know Arch Maryland and everything like that. Any final thoughts that you have that have come along to you in this podcast?
Yeah. Regarding Arch Merrill, I'm going to say, how could you resist picking up a copy of a book titled From Pumpkin Hook to Dumpling Hill? You're going to say, what is that all about? I've got to find that out. But I also would like to recommend some other books or authors that I think folks should look at. Henry Clune's The Genesee, I mentioned that. Eric Sloan, one of my favorite authors, all about early Americana. He was a sign painter by trade, and he has fabulous pen and ink sketches of early Americana with all the explanation of the stories, how to use these tools, what were these tools used for, and so much more. Eric Sloan. And if you want to know New York State history, Walter Edmonds, Harold Thompson, Samuel Hopkins Adams from Adams Basin, that's the same family, and Carl Carmer. Samuel Hopkins Adams wrote grandfather stories. He had a stuffy minister grandfather and a canal walker grandfather, and fabulous stories. So I would recommend looking up those authors too, because local history just excites me.
And if you could, one piece of advice to our younger listeners, maybe that fourth grade kid.
There's so much history around you. Talk to grandma and grandpa. Get those stories. Every one of us gets to be 40, 50 years old and says, why didn't I listen to grandma and grandpa more? Why didn't I get their stories? Even if you're not really interested, you'll have them in your head and you'll know where you came from. All the good people that came before to make you who you are. You should know that. And it's all about family. And fashions change, clothing fashions, automobile fashions, technology fashions, but people are people. And they are your people if you listen to them, and you'll know your story, where you came from.
Well, John, it's been great listening to your story. I learned a lot about you, a lot about our community, and a lot about other things. And going to take a lot away from this. So I really appreciate meeting with you.
Oh, thank you very much for having me on your program.
This has been Chatting with Corcoran on the Big H podcast, and we'll be back again with some other topics and people. Good night.